rise of the Mongols. The story of the Mongols begins in Northeast Asia on the Mongolian Plateau. The climate on the plateau is harsh with hot summers and long cold winters. The relative lack of precipitation gives rise to steppe-like conditions. Too dry for agriculture, the region is ideally suited for pastoralism. Thus, the sparsely populated landscape was home to herders who endured the harsh conditions and moved their flocks back and forth between summer and winter pastures to prevent overgrazing. The hardy little horses were constant companions, playing an integral role in the herder's mobility. With very little land suitable for agriculture, the nomad survived predominantly on wild or domestic meat. Unlike his sedentary counterparts, there was little occupational specialization on the steppe. There was, however, some division of work based on gender. Males and females each had certain pastoral chores. Women looked after and managed the camp. This was especially critical when men went out to fight. In steppe societies, a high percentage of the male population were warriors. The fact that their wives managed the camps and herds while they were gone meant that they could be out for longer periods of time, giving the system a great deal of flexibility. The Mongols of the 12th century were divided along tribal, clan, and family lines. Leadership was determined partly by birth and partly by skill. Those with the ability to manage important members within the tribe tended to be able to make the alliances that were necessary for success. The mainstay of a tribal chieftain's power was ability to attract and support warriors. Youths in Mongolia were reared to be horsemen, practically born on the saddle. They gained experience early on managing and directing herds and hunting game. Their bodies were hardened by extreme temperature. Their riding skills and mobility were second to none. Armed with their powerful composite bow, they were among the greatest warriors in history. Around the year 1160, a woman named Olium gave birth to a son. Legend has it that he grasped a blood clot in his hand at birth, an auspicious sign that one day he would be great. There was nothing auspicious about his early life, though. Left fatherless at a young age, Temujin, along with his mother and siblings, lived a miserable and impoverished existence. With no adult male in the camp, the family was left subject to repeated predations by neighboring clans and tribes. As he matured into adolescence, there were a few options open to Temujin, and he played those brilliantly. One way to gain security was through a marriage alliance, and so Temujin took Borte. In marrying a woman from another tribe, he now had a bond, and therefore some protection with that tribe. Another avenue was to secure and seek the patronage of an already established leader, or Khan, which Temujin did. Finally, by building alliances with other young, rising Mongol warriors, Temujin was able to gain the security that he craved. By raiding and plundering, he was able to gain wealth, demonstrate his prowess, and gain a following of his own. In time, Temujin's success brought the envy of other steppe leaders, and even of some of his former allies. Through a long, bruising process, Temujin was able to use his cunning and his skill to overcome all his rivals in Mongolia, and to unite all of its disparate tribes. At a grand meeting, or Kurultai, in 1206, his followers gave him a new name, Genghis Khan, or fierce ruler. Many leaders had united steppe tribes into confederations in the past, only to have the confederation fall apart upon their death. Tribes were traditionally made up of aristocratic leaders and bands of followers. Powerful individuals might unite several of these leaders and their tribes together into a confederation. While this was certainly much larger, the structure of the tribe stayed intact, and the tribal leaders remained the same. The only difference was that now there were just several of them working under the direction of an even more powerful and bigger leader. Often, after the great leader died, the confederation would fall apart and go back to warring against each other. Genghis Khan changed this. He created a new and stronger type of tribal army that historians have referred to as the Atomized Army. When rival tribes were defeated by the Mongols, the warriors were allowed to live, but Genghis Khan had the tribal leaders killed. He then redistributed the individual warriors across multiple units, made up of diverse tribes. This essentially destroyed the tribal identity that was often the source of friction in tribal confederations. The leaders of these new units were promoted based on their loyalty to Genghis Khan and their ability as commanders. While Genghis Khan broke down the family and tribal bonds of his rivals, he was skillful at using his own family to his advantage. He had 9 sons and daughters, with his principal wife, Borte, as well as numerous other children from different wives and concubines. He used his sons as military commanders and strategically married off his daughter to other tribal leaders, exploiting these family connections and making his army even larger. Having united the Mongolian steppe tribes, Genghis Khan turned his eyes to the south, to the rich agricultural kingdoms of northern China, which he began to plunder in 1205. The Chinese soon learned that the Mongols were nearly invincible in the battlefield. Their only salvation was their walled cities, which had no parallel on the steppe. The Mongols soon learned how to use siege equipment and were thus able to force smaller kingdoms like the Zhizha to surrender. The real prize was the Yuan Dynasty, though. The Mongols were able to sack and take the Jin capital of Zhengdu in 1214. Events in the west soon distracted the Mongols away from China and towards Central Asia, though. The Khwarezm Empire lay to the west of Mongolia. This powerful Muslim kingdom covered much of Central Asia. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a caravan on a trade mission to this kingdom. Unwisely, a local governor massacred and plundered the caravan. Genghis Khan was furious and sent envoys demanding restitution. The Khwarezm Shah, or king, killed the envoys and burnt the beards of the guards, humiliating them and sending them back to Mongolia. Genghis Khan was infuriated. He left China and rode 2,000 miles to Central Asia. Sacking cities along the way, his army left a trail of destruction in its wake. His men force-marched prisoners from sacked cities to the Khwarezm capital, Samarkand, where they were ordered to surround the city and served as human shields. The city surrendered, and with it, the Khorasan Empire effectively ceased to exist. These conquests brought the Mongol Empire to the borders of the Middle East. Genghis Khan rode back to China, intent on punishing some disloyal vassals. But while there, he fell off his horse and died in 1227. The death of Genghis Khan halted all Mongol expansion, as all interested parties rushed back to Mongolia for the election of a new Khan. One of Genghis Khan's sons, Ogadai, emerged as the new leader of the Mongol Empire. Those neighbors of the Mongols who hoped that the death of Genghis Khan would mean the end of Mongol expansion were sorely disappointed. Ogadai was committed to the divine mandate, or the belief that the Mongol Empire should expand and take over the entire world. Ogadai began his reign with a massive conquest of what was left of the Jin kingdom in 1230-31. By 1232, they had surrounded the capital. The sources indicate that this was one of the first uses of gunpowder, as bombs were loaded onto catapults and flung over the city walls. By 1234, the Yuan Dynasty had collapsed, and the Mongols were on to their next victim. Like his father, Ogadai also campaigned in the west, driving into the Middle East through the Caucasus Mountains, subjugating Russia, and even invading Europe as far as Poland and Hungary, before his death in 1241 brought this round of invasions to a halt. The Mongols created the largest contiguous land empire of all time. While it was rightly known for violence and destruction, this was not the whole story. In creating such a large empire, the Mongols did create the conditions for cultural exchange between East and West in Eurasia. The Pax Mongolia, or the Mongol Peace, was the name some historians have given to this period after the main part of the Mongol conquest ended. The Mongols were very interested in trade, and so the Silk Road thrived during this period. They were also interested in the creation of luxury products, doing much to facilitate their creation. This wasn't always pleasant for the artisans, who were often uprooted from their homes and then settled in far-off artisan colonies. But it did a lot to promote the cross-fertilization of artisanal techniques between East and West. One factor that will be important to keep in mind as we explore the Mongols is their patrimonial political structure. Unlike many agrarian empires where there was a clear hierarchical structure, with an emperor or a king at the summit and a bureaucracy with a chain of command doing his bidding, the Mongols thought of their empire more like a family inheritance. Genghis Khan was reproductively prolific. He had many offspring from many different wives. All of these members of the family were entitled to a cut of the inheritance and to a share of the empire's wealth. Children of primary wives were favored in the inheritance, but lesser sons and daughters all got territory based on rank and were entitled to some of the spoils. This tended to weaken the absolute authority of the Khan and would eventually lead to the empire's breakup, but that will be in the future. A closely related issue for the Mongols was the succession issue. While most civilizations practice primogeniture, that is, the oldest son inherits, the Mongol Khan was elected to some degree. On the death of the Khan, the leading family members would meet at a large gathering called a Kurultai and decide on who the next Khan should be. It might be primogeniture, or the oldest son. It might be the youngest son. The rank of the mother might be a factor. It might not be a son at all. It could be the oldest male, maybe the former Khan's brother. Sometimes the previous ruler even selected someone in advance, and this was a factor. As you can imagine, things got pretty messy with this system, and often did. Genghis Khan had 4 sons through his principal wife. The youngest of these sons was Tuluay. Tuluay died on campaign in China, but before he died, he married a woman called Suraktani, whom he had 4 children with. As mentioned, children, grandchildren, and daughter-in-laws were entitled to territories within the empire. Suraktani was allotted territory in northern China. She turned this region into a bit of a model as far as the Mongols were concerned. Unlike most Mongols, who saw sedentary populations as passive victims to be plundered, Suraktani realized the value in protecting and taxing agriculturalists, which saw her domains thrive. She also harbored ambitions for her children, who without a father were not particularly well placed in the Mongol hierarchy. She secretly built alliances and client networks, and pulled off a bit of a coup, and got her son Möngke elected Great Khan. This is sometimes called the Tuluid Revolution because it saw the sons of Tului come to power. As Khan, Möngke pursued the divine mandate like his successors and expanded the Mongol realm. He sent Kublai to China to war against the wealthy Song Dynasty. He sent Hulagu to the Middle East to subjugate that region. And he left his younger brother, Boke, to guard the home front in Mongolia. The death of Möngke in 1258, while campaigning with Kublai in southern China, set off another power struggle. This time, the contenders would be Kublai and his brother Boke. Boke had the support of Mongol traditionalists who were growing concerned about Kublai's comfortable relationship with agriculturalists. Kublai was able to draw on the support of his brother Hulagu and emerge victorious. He was nominated Khan at the Kurultai in 1260. We'll pick up the story of Kublai in our next lecture.